Hello, lovers of mystery and ancient legends. Today, we will embark on a magical journey, crossing the burning yellow deserts of Egypt, climbing the snow-capped peaks of the Inca's Andes, and entering distant lands where people have found strange and mysterious ways to preserve the bodies of the deceased. This is not only a story about death, but also a story about immortality, about how civilizations have prolonged the existence of the soul through the unchanging body. Relax, close your eyes, and let the narrator lull you into a deep sleep, where you will see silent boats on the Nile, bodies sleeping in ice, and smoke rings of tree resin wrapped around the darkness. A world both beautiful and terrifying is waiting for you to explore. Under the burning yellow desert sky, the red sun was like a giant eye of Ra looking down on the mortal world. The hot wind whistled through the ancient sandstones, carrying the whispers of time. There, in the heart of the Valley of the Dead Kings, a group of people walked silently, their shoulders weighed down not only by treasure chests, but also by something more sacred than gold and silver, the body of a pharaoh who had just left this world. In the fading twilight, the embalmers of the royal palace gathered around the deep underground chamber. They wore white linen, their heads covered with scarves, their eyes solemn as if they were looking not at a corpse, but at a door to the other world. An old embalmer, holding a small bronze knife, whispered, "Listen, because from now on, you will no longer be a human, but the immortal soul of Egypt." They began their work under the flickering light of torches, the scent of incense and resin mixed together, mingling into a strange aroma, both sweet and pungent, as if not of this world. Each cut, each hand that held the body, each layer of linen wrapped around the body, all happened slowly, the ritual like a slow dance of death and eternity. On the walls, carvings of the god Anubis, the head of a jackal, stood guard, his dark stone eyes deep, as if witnessing every action. A soft singing sounded, it was unclear whether it came from a human throat or from deep within the stone. The lyrics were so ancient that no one understood the full meaning, only that it was the language of the gods. Far across the ocean, where the Andes peaks pierce the sky, another civilization also preserves the dead for a new life after death. The sun here is called Inti, and the Incas believe that humans are his children. At high altitudes where the air is thin and the snow is white, they place the bodies of warriors, sacrificed virgins, or leaders on sacred peaks. Not to melt into the earth, but to let them lie in the embrace of ice, keeping their skin and hair as they were when they were alive. A young girl, her eyes closed as if sleeping, her lips still pink, is placed in a stone niche, surrounded by ceramic pots of corn and coca, and embroidered cloths with images of the sun and the condor. Shamans blow smoke, calling her soul back to the mountain god Apu. The biting cold holds back every strand of hair, every fold of her dress, and the wind whistles through the crevices of the rocks like the song of the universe sending her off to eternity. But it is not only the Egyptians or the Incas who preserve the bodies of the dead. On a remote island in the middle of the East Sea, people have a different way of preserving. They leave the corpses sitting in stilt houses, wearing their best clothes, and every year bring them out to dance and sing with the village. The smell of the kitchen smoke permeates the skin, seeping through each layer of bone, preventing the corpses from decomposing but gradually drying out over the years. At night, the flickering firelight reflects on the dry, cracked faces, and sometimes, a shadow moves as if to keep pace with the drums. In the frozen Siberia, reindeer hunting tribes have tombs buried deep in the permafrost. They place their dead with their essentials, bows and arrows, for clothes, even a dog curled up next to them. The eternal cold keeps both people and animals in hibernation, waiting to awaken when the world's spring comes, and somewhere, in the dense forests, mysterious tribes use tree resin, smoke and ash to turn the dead into statues that stand silently in the middle of their houses. No one dares to touch them, but on rainy nights, the sound of water dripping on the thatched roofs sounds like a whisper, and the eyes of these statues reflect lightning as if they are still alive, wherever they are. Under the hot sun of the desert or in the cold snow and ice, in the scent of incense or the smoke of the kitchen, they all share the same desire, to keep the dead from completely disappearing, so that their souls can find their way back, or stay forever with the living. Under the full moon that silvered the Nile, small boats drifted on the black waters, carrying large jars filled with aromatic resins from the distant land of Punt. Their scent was sweet and mysterious, like the scent of a garden buried beneath the sands of 1,000 years. On the east bank, in the great hall of the embalming house, limestone canopic jars stood ready, their lids carved with the images of the 4 sons of Horus, each holding the soul of a part of the body. The old embalmer bent over, his hands trembling but precise with each stroke. He used small iron hooks to remove the brain through the nasal cavity, his movements as slow as if he were removing each thread from a precious cloth. The assistants were silent, only the crackling of the fire and the soft footsteps on the cold stone floor could be heard. When the heart was removed, he placed it in a small box inlaid with precious stones, whispering, "O heart, do not betray yourself when you stand before the scales of Ma'at." Outside the door, the desert wind blew through the stone columns, echoing the sound of ancient singing. The figures in the murals seemed to move with the torchlight. The god Osiris sat on a blue throne, Anubis tilted his head to listen, and the goddess Isis spread her wings to protect. At the same time, in the southern sky, the peaks of the Andes were covered in a thick night mist. A group of Inca shamans climbed the narrow path, each step like entering the mouth of a giant mountain god. They carried the body of a young warrior, his face stern, his long black hair tied back, his hands still clutching an obsidian knife. When they arrived, they dug a small hole in the ice and sat him upright, facing east, where the sun would rise. They draped a red cloak over his shoulders, and placed beside him a bag of dried corn, coca leaves, and a flute made of bird bones. The chanting rose and fell, blending with the howling wind through the canyon. An old shaman pressed his wrinkled hand to his forehead. "From now on, you are Apu's son. When the sun rises, you will go with him." The moonlight shone down, making the ice around him sparkle like broken mirrors, reflecting a gaze that still seemed to have a spark of life. Further away, on an island amidst the raging waves, there was a tribe that kept the corpses of their ancestors in the main house in the village. The bodies were dry, the skin stretched over the bones, but they were dressed in new clothes every festival season. When the drums sounded, the villagers carried their ancestors out into the yard, circling around the fire, singing ancient songs that only the dead could fully understand. The children ran around, not afraid but giggling, because to them, death was just a change of residence for the soul. In the flickering firelight, the hollow eyes of the dry corpses shone with a golden light, as if smiling at their descendants, and in the cold north, in the dense snow forests of Siberia, a pine mausoleum was opened after hundreds of years of being frozen. Inside, a man in a reindeer fur coat, spear in hand, leather boots on his feet, beside him lay a white dog that had fallen asleep forever. Their skin was still intact, their hair and mustache unfaded. On the wooden ceiling, someone had carved galloping reindeer and sun rings, like a promise of a new hunt in the afterlife. Outside, a blizzard was raging, and the wind whistling through the cracks in the wood sounded like the howling of hunting dogs calling for their master. But there is a more secret place, deep in the rainforest, where tribes use resin, ash and smoke to transform the dead into living statues. Flesh and blood are replaced by a layer of petrified wood, dry but still intact. These statues are placed in the center of the house, to guard the sleep of the village. When the rain falls at night on the thatched roof, the patter mingles with the sound of insects. Sometimes someone swears that they see the corners of the statue's lips move slightly, as if whispering to the darkness. All civilizations, however distant, share a secret belief: death is not the end, but a journey. And to keep that journey from being lost, they preserve the body, like a map for the soul to find its way back. In the airless underground chamber, the embalmer places strips of linen soaked in myrrh on the pharaoh's body, like frozen strips of moonlight on the sand. He drew small red ink marks on his wrists, ankles, chest, and forehead, then tilted his head to listen to a sound no one else could hear, a murmur from deep within the stone, where the gods stirred like sleeping dragons. The torch crackled, releasing golden butterflies of fire, and the shadow of Anubis on the wall suddenly lengthened, covering the whole room like a cloak of night. A young assistant, his hand not yet accustomed to the weight of eternity, asked softly, as if dreaming, "Master, what happens if the heart forgets its oath?" The embalmer did not look up, his voice like sand sliding across the stone. The heart does not remember, but the symbol does. The cloth remembers. The perfume remembers. The stone remembers. And the darkness itself remembers. Outside, the Nile silently listened to the story, letting the stars drift down to the bottom of the water. In this place where the river gives birth, the dead are wrapped like seeds, to one day burst open and sprout in another world. The workers wrap the cloth in the whirl of the desert wind, from the ankles, the wrists, then the chest, the neck, and finally the face, where the dynasty resides in a closed gaze. On the green-plated coffin lid, the dark coal eyes are like two windows opening into the mysterious mist between life and death. The night leans its shoulders across half the sky. They place the canopic jars at the four corners of the room, like four invisible sentinels. An old assistant sings, his voice hoarse like the wind grinding through a well. O shadow, O breath, O name, O form, still remain when we pass through the doors of those who do not turn back. The song falls like slow raindrops, sinking into the stone powder, into the aromatic resin, into the fine linen thread as thin as dew, never to be dissolved. On the Andean peaks, mist crept over the rocky outcrops like llamas in their sleep. The sun had not yet risen, but the horizon was already oozing with a copper glow. The Inca shamans gathered in a circle around the young warrior, placing in the center a clay bowl containing crushed coca leaves mixed with mountain ash. They dipped their fingers into the mixture, making small dots on his forehead, cheeks, lips, as if drawing invisible paths for his soul to follow. He sat upright, his back touching the cold stone as if making an oath. High in the sky, a condor spread its wings, slowly gliding by, its eyes as dark as a bottomless pit. The oldest of the shamans looked up at the bird. The sign has come. The path from the mountaintop to the sun has opened, the ice around them exhales white streaks. The bone flute sounds delicately, like silver thread sewing the two silent banks. The red cloak covering his shoulders falls lightly, the surface of the fabric is rough like the sun braided with thread. The youngest of the group smiles involuntarily when he sees a spark from the tip of the obsidian knife, bridging the gap between darkness and dawn, as if he is still alive, just pausing to listen to the mountain talk. Then the wind rises. The cloud breaks into 1,000 pieces. The first light falls on the stone steps, sprinkling gold on the mist. They bow their heads. The warrior is entrusted with the cold intact, to become a hot stone smoldering inside the ice. From then on, whenever anyone passes that gorge, they hear invisible footsteps following, not heavy, not light, just enough to remember that there is someone up there watching over the sun, in the middle of an island where the two seasons of rain and sun follow each other like two ancient songs. The ancestral house stands in the sea breeze with a thatched roof dark with smoke. Inside, wooden shelves hang bodies that have dried like fruits that have passed through the fire, their skin cracked but still giving off the sweet smell of kitchen smoke. Each face is wiped with coconut oil, each hair is combed with a seashell comb. Each set of clothes woven with patterns of waves and seabirds is changed when the full moon opens its eyes. On the night of the ceremony, the sound of the drums is deep like the beating heart of the earth. Young people carry the ancestral chairs out into the yard, place them in a circle around the fire, and dance. Their footsteps draw swirls in the sand. Those swirls seep into the ancestors' eyes, becoming the movement of a calm smile. A boy stopped before a dry face, eyes as deep as two dry wells. He tilted his head to listen. There was a sound like the sound of waves crashing on a rock hundreds of years ago. He placed a newly strung string of conch shells on the ancestor's shoulder, whispering in a voice smaller than a grain of sand, "Come home and play with me." The wind blew through the coconut trees, the leaves shook in response. The fire licked the wooden surface, illuminating the wrinkles like a map of storms, of memorable seasons, of distant sea voyages. No one could see clearly, but in the light, the thin hand like a bird's wing of a dry corpse tilted slightly, as if nodding, in the north of the globe. The snow was thick like the memory of an ancient beast. The pine tomb slept in the rock-hard soil, the dark brown beams smelled of resin. When the strange heat of the season made the ice expand and contract, sometimes the wooden door shook slightly as if breathing. Inside, the hunter lay on his side, his face turned toward the door, his whiskers still curling into a persistent smile. The white dog curled up in the hollow of his knees, its fur still holding the silvery glow of the winter moon. On the wooden roof, someone had carved circles long ago, like small suns flowing into streams. A pack of wolves passed by, not howling, just watching. Their eyes were sharp as broken ice. For a moment, the leader stopped, turned his head toward the wooden door, as if recognizing a familiar scent. He stood still for a long time, until the wind changed direction. Then the pack moved on, leaving light footprints like punctuation marks of the wind. Farther out, in the rain-scented jungle, the bodies of people, steamed with resin and ashes, stood upright on the floor like the spines of memory. Flesh had turned to wood, blood to scent, voices to cracks running from lips to neck. Normally, they were silent. In season, they were bathed in smoke. The smoke crept through closed teeth, through deep eye sockets, through the rope tied around their wrists, tiptoed like a night dancer, and left with a sigh as sweet as ripe fruit. Sometimes the sky would storm, the sound of rain tapping on the roof like fingers memorizing a strange song. The firekeeper sat leaning against a pillar, dozing, suddenly opening his eyes because he believed he had just seen the lips of a statue quivering like silk threads. No one was afraid. Life only changed clothes. At the bottom of distant swamps, where the water was as black as a mirror, there were bodies sinking to become messages from the earth. They slept on moss and root mattresses, wrapped in the embrace of young mud. Seasons passed. The sun filtered through the clouds. Years piled upon years like old wood. One day, a dark brown face was fished up, the eyelids closed, the eyebrows still like thin streaks of fire. The lips were soft as if they had just told a secret. The leather string tied around the neck was like a wind-trapped path. People stood around, not daring to move, for they saw there a fingerprint of time, stamped on the flesh without fading. The sky tilted down. The black lake trembled. The reeds whispered lost names. Back in Egypt, the embalmer placed the amulet of green stone in the shape of a scarab over the still heart. The scarab was as small as a folded mourning, but as heavy as an oath. He tied a red thread around the neck of the amulet, letting his voice sink between the layers of cloth, roll the sun through the darkness. As the coffin lid was lowered, the sound of wood against wood rang out firmly like the footsteps of a boat on a night river. The embalmers stepped back, bowing their heads. For a moment, everyone thought they heard the sound of cat paws circling. Batet was visiting, bringing with her the scent of a home where there was no more shadow of disease. On the other side of the wall, the drawings bloomed like flowers, the words turned into birds flying into the night, the procession of people carrying the coffin passed through the cold stone corridor, the ceiling painted with moons, stars, and cereal grass. The ceramic pots were placed in niches, dried food and sweet wine were placed neatly, the golden crown was in a wooden box, the linen shirt was folded flat like a calm river. The wind from the skylight poured down, carrying the holy sand that fell like rain. When the tomb door closed, only the small oil lamps were left to pour light inside, like golden rivers leading the way. And hidden within the walls, a very distant melody began to play, the sound of oars splashing water of the night boat carrying the soul to meet the stars. On the mountaintop, the Inca girl sat in the arms of ice, as light as a flower petal held back by winter. Her cheeks were pink as if she had just emerged from a dream of the sun. People left her corn kernels like little stars to count the time, a rag doll to chat with when the wind changed seasons, a bag of coca leaves to sip the joys and sorrows of the dew. At night, silver foxes ran around the cliff, leaving crooked footprints like the writing of the wind. She did not answer. But when the sun touched her closed eyelids, a thin ray of light like a hair slid down, waking the nearby rocks to turn red like coal. The village elders said that sometimes, on the longest day of the year, you could hear the footsteps of children on the trail, not heavy, not hurried, like someone looking for a small bone trumpet hidden in a crevice of the rocks by the wind. If the trumpet sounded, it would connect the two banks of light and dark like a bridge of smoke. The festival on the island came again. The wreaths of shells formed into laughter. The old people smeared oil on the ancestors' foreheads like the new moon on the water. The children ran around, hiding small pieces of mirrors in their sleeves to catch the fire and hiding them in their pockets as if saving a drop for tomorrow. The bearers lifted the chair high, turned it around once, twice, and stopped in front of the sea. The sea shivered slightly. A large fish emerged in the distance, flicking its tail as if keeping time. The ancestors tilted their heads to look, and perhaps, if anyone dared to put their ear to that dry wood, they would hear a greeting in the voice of the waves from centuries ago. That night, when the fire died down, the gray ash flew towards the coconut trees, settling on the roof like the smoke from the kitchens of those who had left. They remained in the smell of ash and coconut oil, in the swaying of the shells, and in the song that never ended. At the end of the blizzard, the white dog in the wooden tomb was no longer awake, but its scent remained in the wood, the scent of winter sun-dried fur, the smell of mud stuck between the toes, the smell of the master's hand caressing the fire. One night, the sky was torn by the northern light, sparkling like silk ribbons of a pampered person. Light poured into the tiny cracks in the wood. The hunter lay still, but if you looked closely, you could see the shadow of his mustache moving slightly, as if the wind had snuck in and wanted to tell the story of chasing the reindeer across the frozen lake, creating a sound like 100 small leather drums beating in unison, in another season. The snow closed in again. The door was heavier. The silence was thicker. But the circles carved on the roof still connected firmly, like the links of an endless song. One rainy night, in a house on stilts in the middle of the forest, the fire had gone to sleep but the smoke still remembered the way. It searched for the upright body, passing through the neck as thin as a dry bamboo. Suddenly, from the doorway, a blue flash of lightning flashed by, illuminating the wooden face with a moment of freshness like new leaves. The firekeeper held his breath. A raindrop fell from the roof, touched the lips of the statue, and exploded with a small sound like a grain of salt hitting a hot pan. He looked up at the darkness where the roofs met. There, the black lizards were as silent as punctuation marks. He closed his eyes, exhaled slowly, and knew that all stories were being copied, in resin, ash, smoke, and time. The night deepens, the desert stretches its shoulders endlessly, the mountains lift dreams close to the stars, the sea lulls the palm trees with its salty breath, the ice locks the door of snow, the forest keeps its secrets in its damp scent. In these places, the living and the dead meet not by call, but by rituals that have become the heartbeat of the earth. Whoever sees a linen cloth wrapped around a resting face will remember the golden rivers in the darkness. Whoever touches the cold ice on the mountaintop will see the sun hidden in its heart of ice. Whoever passes by the house hung with dried corpses will hear the laughter of children like salt dissolved in water. Whoever stands before the frozen pine door will see circles like the eyes of time looking back. Whoever stands in the house of smoke and resin will learn to listen to the rain spelling out names, and then, that same night, a nameless wind moves along the Nile, passes the stone steps, kisses the door of a newly closed tomb. In the depths of the earth, a small golden boat trembles, its oars rising and falling, making its way through the velvety layers of darkness. On the bow of the boat, a dung beetle pushed the sun like a round stone toward the sleeping dawn. Far away, the mountaintop breathed, ice flowing in a thin thread, seeping into the rock, weaving another story into the fragile sky of the early morning. The story is not over, for the world is far from over. But in the places where the body is kept, deserts, mountains, islands, ice, and forests, everything is ready for the next part of the song, where old vows meet new paths, and closed eyes open to another sky. There, a sleeping king will walk through the reed fields of the spirit, a mountain maiden will enter the festival of the sun, a dry ancestor will put his hand on the shoulder of his grandson, a hunter and his white dog will chase the green light, a wooden statue will laugh when the rain learns its name, the night goes on, and sleep ripens like a fruit forgetting itself on a branch. At the edge of that sleep, there is the sound of oars parting the mist. The sound of bone flutes sowing the light and dark, the island drums calling the name of the waves, the crackling of ice like silent fireworks, and the sound of smoke riding on the thatch and then erasing it. Then the silence returns, fine as sand, thick as snow, warm as a stove. In the deep darkness of time, the Egyptian tomb door stood still, but behind it, the pharaoh's soul had left his body and stepped onto the night boat. The golden boat slid across the inky water, each raised or releasing a thin streak of light like a knife, cutting the night in two. On both banks, the tall reeds swayed gently as if in greeting, and in their shadows, the green eyes of the crocodile god Sobek watched. Not threatening, only guarding. Ahead, a bridge of moonlight spanned the river of death. On it, Anubis waited, his ears erect like night markers, holding the scales of Ma'at. The pharaoh stopped, handing over the heart protected by the amulet. The scales tilted slightly, the feathers of Ma'at quivered, then stood still, the heart was light as a promise kept. Anubis nodded. In the distance, the gates of immortality opened, and a jade-green light poured down, but not blinding, but warm as the autumn sun. The pharaoh entered, carrying with him the whispers of the embalmers who had sent him off, the songs that fell deep into the rocks, and the lingering scent of myrrh. On the Andes, the snow still wrapped the young girl like a giant blanket. But in her dream, summer had come. She saw herself walking down from the mountaintop, passing through golden cornfields, meeting dead relatives but still smiling. They gave her a bone trumpet, saying, "When the wind blows from the sea, blow it up, so the sun knows its way back." In real life, the cold wind swirled around the mountaintop. A condor landed near the rock where she sat, shook its feathers, and then cried out loudly. The cry echoed down the valley, causing the people at the foot of the mountain to look up. They said that the condor's cry was strange today, like someone was blowing a trumpet in its throat. And in the village, tiny wild flowers bloomed, although the ice had not yet melted. On the distant island, the festival night had ended, but the shell wreaths still hung from the pillars, swaying gently in the sea breeze. The old man sat in front of the door, looking into the empty courtyard. There, the chairs where the ancestors had been placed still bore indentations in the sand. He closed his eyes, and it seemed as if he saw a group of people wearing cloth dyed the color of the waves, walking towards the sea, each step leaving a faint trail of light. When he opened his eyes, the sea was still, only the moonlight flowed down, forming a silver path leading into the distance. In the central house, the dry corpses sat silently. An island cat entered, jumped onto an ancestor's chair, and curled up to sleep. When it dreamed, its legs stretched slightly, as if swimming among the waves that no one remembered. In the frozen Siberia, the pine mausoleum was immersed in a white silence. But tonight, the sky was on fire in the north, the blue, purple, and pink light streaks entwined like silken dragons. Light streamed through the cracks in the wood, falling on the hunter's face, and for a moment the closed eyes seemed to tremble slightly. The white dog tilted its head, its ears pricked up as if it heard distant footsteps approaching. If anyone had been there, they would have seen fresh wolf tracks in the snow, leading from the depths of the forest straight to the tomb door. Not a single trace returned. In the rainforest, the night rain fell in torrents, drops as big as pearls, hitting the stilt house roof. Smoke from the stove crept up, finding its way through the motionless bodies. As the smoke curled around the neck of a wooden statue, a soft tapping sound came from inside, as if someone were tapping the tree trunk to signal. The firekeeper stepped forward, placed his hand on the statue's chest, and felt a surprising warmth. He withdrew his hand, but immediately the smell of newly melted sap filled the room, a rich, fresh, sweet smell, as if it had just been extracted from the bark, the smell of life beginning anew. Outside, the rain lashed the leaves, making the whole forest sing a wordless song. And in a secret place in the northern swamp, the black water surface was as smooth as a mirror today. A black bird swooped down, its beak touching the water, causing ripples. From the bottom of the lake, a figure slowly emerged, as if drawn up by the moonlight. The eyes were still closed, but the corners of the lips curved slightly, as if hearing a story that had not been told for a long time. When the shadow touches the water, the waves dissolve, and all is quiet again. But whoever stands on the shore will smell the scent of wet grass mixed with the scent of pine resin, the scent of a forest that has disappeared for thousands of years, desert, mountain, island, ice, forest, and swamp, 6 doors guarding sleep. In each place, death and life are not clearly separated, but blend together like 2 colors on the same ancient cloth. These rituals preserve not only the form, but also the story, so that when the time comes, it can be opened and told again. And tonight, in the silence of the universe, these stories are touching. From the banks of the Nile, the golden boat drifts towards the Andes. From the mountaintops, the wind carries the trumpets down to the island. From the island, the ashes fly to the Siberian forest. From Siberia, the northern lights shine down on the rainforest. From the forest, the scent of resin spreads to the swamp. And from the swamp, the water reflects the moonlight, sending it back to the desert. The cycle is closed, but the story remains open. On the Nile of eternal night, the golden boat of the pharaoh no longer floats alone. From afar, through the silver mist, other boats appear, each with a different shape, an ice condor from the Andes. Its wings long like oars, a bamboo raft from a distant island, carrying dried corpses dressed in sea-patterned clothes, a sled from Siberia, pulled by a white dog that leaves no footprints, a hollow tree trunk floating from the rainforest, with a human face carved on its prow, and a mossy raft from the marsh, carrying a figure sleeping under the reeds, all silently drifted in the same direction. where the pale blue light gathered into a gate to heaven. In the sky above, the stars shifted, forming patterns no one had ever seen before: beetles, condor, whales, wolves, lizards, and black birds, all connected by the silver thread of the moon. In the water, reflections also drifted, unable to dissipate. The pharaoh stood at the bow of the boat, holding an emerald staff. Nearby, the Inca girl sat holding a bone trumpet. The dry ancestor from the island held a hand drum. The hunter and the white dog stood side by side, looking ahead. The wooden statue from the forest held a handful of half-burnt dry leaves. And the figure from the swamp still had its eyes closed, but every time the waves touched it, its lips trembled slightly. No one spoke, but sounds began to spread: the sound of oars, the sound of trumpets, the sound of drums, the distant barking of dogs, the sound of burning leaves, the murmur of water. These sounds overlapped into a strange song, sounding like a call from farther back than time. At the gate of heaven, a guard in a cloak woven of moonlight, his face hidden in the darkness, spoke in a voice like the rolling of stones on the sand: "You come from 6 doors. You hold 6 stories. But this realm opens only when the story becomes one." The pharaoh raised his staff, the staff glowing like the Nile at noon. The Inca girl raised her trumpet to her lips, blowing out a stream of sound like the early summer wind flowing through a crevice in the rocks. The dry ancestor beat the drum, the rhythm slow and deep like the heart of the sea. The hunter let out a whistle, the wolf echoed from afar. The wooden statue dropped a handful of leaves into the water, the smoke rose like a soul just leaving its body. The figure from the swamp opened its eyes, its gaze seemed to contain the entire sky before humans existed. Sounds, scents, images entwined, becoming an invisible thread that connected them all. The gate of heaven shuddered, the light strands parting like petals, revealing a space within that was neither sky nor earth, but a deep silence, where every moment was happening at once. They entered. Here, desert and mountain, sea and ice, forest and swamp coexisted in a single breath. A field of reeds grew among the icebergs. A condor perched on a stone pillar in the middle of the sea. Palm trees and pines stood side by side in the wind. The black water of the swamp mixed with the yellow sand, forming a mirror that reflected both. Their stories began to melt into each other. The pharaoh told of a night river journey. The Inca girl added the cold dawn, the dry ancestor added the rhythm of the sea drum, the hunter added the sound of animal footsteps, the wooden statue dropped the smell of smoke and resin, the human figure from the swamp added the moist whisper of the earth. All of this blends into a new legend, no longer distinguishing between place or time. In that legend, death is no longer the end, but a way to move on to another story, carrying with it what has not yet been said. And anyone who hears this song, whether in the desert, the high mountains, the remote islands, the ice, the jungle, or the swamp, will recognize in it a familiar voice, the voice of their own ancestors calling back. Beyond the gates of heaven, the world still sleeps. The Nile still flows under the moonlight, the Andes are still covered with snow, the sea still laps at the shores of the islands, the cold wind still sweeps through the pine forests, the rain still falls in the canopy, and the black water is still as smooth as a mirror. But somewhere, in the sound of the wind, the sound of the waves, the sound of the leaves, one can faintly hear the melody of the Song of the Six Doors, a song that only those who have held the body of the deceased can fully understand. And so, the story continues, never ending. The gates of the six worlds stand open, the light inside spilling out like a golden river pouring down from the sky. There is no longer a boundary between the coolness of ice and the heat of the desert, between the smell of resin and the scent of myrrh, between the sound of the sea drum and the wolf whistle. All have merged into one common breath, deep as the heart of the earth, long as the moons march around the sky. The pharaoh stands in the center of the circle, his emerald staff stuck in the ground without soil, without water. Beneath him, the flat surface reflected not only human figures, but also past and future lives. On the right, the Inca girl held a bone trumpet close to her heart, her black eyes shining with a spark that had overcome the ice of 1,000 years. On the left, the dry ancestor lifted a sea drum, his bony hands tapping each beat as if calling waves from the depths. Behind, the hunter placed his hand on the neck of a white dog, the sound of its heartbeat blending with the wind from the snowy peaks. Beside him, the wooden statue stood still, but smoke rose from its sturdy body like morning dew in the forest. And finally, the figure from the swamp tilted its head, letting black drops of water drip from its hair, spreading out in a circle like a lunar eclipse. A voice rang out, not from one, but from all. 6 doors have opened. 6 stories have entered. The final path is now visible. The ground shook slightly, and from the center of the circle a path emerged, stretching like a fallen galaxy. On the path, there was no sand, no ice, only sparkling light, where each grain of light was a memory, a breath, an unspoken word, a footstep of the dead. They walked on that path. With each step, memories from 6 regions spread out, touching each other, the reed fields of Egypt blooming on the Siberian ice, the Andes bowing to let the island palm grow, the ashes from the island stove falling into the black swamp water, rising into small petals. The smoke from the wooden statues mingling with the Nile, giving the water the scent of a distant forest. The path led them to a vast void, where the sky and the earth embraced in a circle. There was a large stone table, but the surface was water, so smooth and clear that you could see the stars at the bottom. 6 people, or 6 shadows, sat around the table. They did not speak, but placed the objects they had brought on the surface, the emerald staff, the bone trumpet, the sea drum, the arrow and white dog's hand, the dry leaves, and a drop of black water. When the last object touched the water, a ripple spread out, then subsided. From the depths of the water grew an image, not one person, but all the faces of those who had been preserved from all ages. There were faces that no one knew, faces that had sung at festivals, that had lain still in ice, that had dried in ash, that had sunk in mud, that had been wrapped in linen amid the scent of myrrh. They all opened their eyes. The light from those eyes rose, covering the stone table, the road, all 6 people. In an instant, there was no longer any distinction between life and death, only an ocean of memories, where each soul was a drop, and all the drops merged into a single entity, immortal not because they were never lost, but because they were always remembered, always finding their way back into the story. When the light subsided, the 6 people were no longer there. Only a gentle wind blew, carrying an indescribable scent, part sand, part ice, part salt, part smoke, part wet earth, part tree sap. And everywhere in the world, from deserts to deep forests, from remote islands to high mountains, from ice to swamps, there were people who suddenly stopped in the middle of their work, as if hearing something familiar, making them look up, smiling without knowing why, for the story is finished, but it has also just begun again, like the sun rising after a long night, and will rise forever, as long as there are still people who keep the form of the one who has gone far away. The end of the story comes as light as a night breeze, thin and long, seeping through every crack of time. The sky is black and quiet, the stars hang still like grains of salt sleeping in a glass jar. On the ground, the once distant regions have now blended together, there are no longer boundaries of desert or mountain, sea or ice, forest or swamp. In that darkness, the footsteps of many generations of ancestors echo, not noisy, just like the sound of flowing sand, the sound of dry leaves touching each other, the sound of rain hitting the thatched roof. It is the slow heartbeat of the world, a rhythm that lulls all living beings into the same dream, the dream of going far but still finding the way back. A falling star, no one wishes for anything, because all wishes are already in the story. The reed petal falls to the river surface, drifting slowly, as if thinking about something from thousands of years ago. In the thin smoke of the ashes, the shadow of a young woman appears and then disappears into the wind. Deep in the ice, a child's laughter rings out briefly. In the crevices of the rocks by the sea, the distant drum beats 3 times. Then falls silent. The souls who passed through the last door together now sit somewhere in the middle of the space, looking down at the world like a mother watching her child sleep. They do not interfere, do not call, only occasionally leaving a very small mark, a scent of resin wafting through the middle of the street. A condor flying across the desert, a circle carved on a driftwood log, a wolf's footprint on the melting snow, or a flower blooming in the swamp in the middle of winter. As you fall asleep, you may find yourself in the middle of a circle of 6 doors, hearing the sound of trumpets and drums, the sound of waves and wind, the sound of fire and rain. No one calls your name, but you know that everyone is waiting. As they have been waiting for ages, you step onto that path of light, carrying your own story, to place it on the stone table beneath the reflected sky when it is your turn, and then, in your dream, you understand, there is no death, only the intermissions between the endless epic. The story ends, only to begin again, like the breathing of the earth, like the sound of the waves that never stops. Hello, lovers of mystery and ancient legends. Today, we will embark on a magical journey, crossing the burning yellow deserts of Egypt, climbing the snow-capped peaks of the Inca's Andes, and entering distant lands where people have found strange and mysterious ways to preserve the bodies of the deceased. This is not only a story about death, but also a story about immortality, about how civilizations have prolonged the existence of the soul through the unchanging body. Relax, close your eyes, and let the narrator lull you into a deep sleep, where you will see silent boats on the Nile, bodies sleeping in ice, and smoke rings of tree resin wrapped around the darkness. A world both beautiful and terrifying is waiting for you to explore.